ask for what you want versus accepting what people are willing to give you in every aspect of your life, personal, professional. I think it is a thing to live by. And it's a thing that I coach and a thing that obviously I practice what I preach, right?
Yes.
That the worst thing that can happen is they say no. And what if you ask and they say yes? And what if even they don't say yes all the time, but you get a yes 50% of the time? How much better is your life for always asking for exactly what it is you want? And I found in my coaching life, most people don't do that or don't naturally come to that.
Welcome. You are listening to Season 2 of the Bonafide Leaders Podcast, a podcast that exists to inspire legitimate and authentic leadership in the workplace and beyond, and I'm your host, Tim G. Williams. Now, here in Season 2, our theme is Making the Leap. You may call it leveling up, uncharted territory, or expanding your reach. It's those times in our life and our careers when we take on a new challenge. You'll discover how you can successfully navigate your own huge leaps as you hear stories from me and others. This season, I'm excited to be interviewing some exceptional leaders from a variety of fields who will share some of the big leaps they've made. You'll get a glimpse into what's enabled both their professional and personal success. Now, a quick housekeeping note. If you're finding this podcast useful, remember to subscribe and be sure to leave a rating or review. All right, welcome in again to another edition of the Bonafide Leaders Podcast. I am Tim G. Williams, and I am thrilled to have another guest in studio with me today. It is none other than Art L. George Jr. And I like to say the L could even stand for the legend, because to me, Art George is a legend for those in the semiconductor industry, those who know Texas Instruments as a company, or even NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. He's a very well-known guy, and I consider him a friend, a mentor, former colleague, and I'm thrilled to share a little bit of his knowledge with this audience. Let me start by reading your bio. So Art, along with his wife, Gwen, formed the George Development Group in 2014 after his retirement from Texas Instruments Incorporated. The GDG provides one-on-one career coaching and life mentoring to professionals and aspiring professionals in the corporate and business world. The GDG also conducts development sessions and makes motivational speeches to groups and organizations, and I can attest that Art is fabulous at making speeches. Prior to his retirement, Art spent 30 years at TI. His technical expertise is in semiconductors and integrated circuit new product development. Art's last position was Senior VP and Manager over TI's analog engineering operations. Prior to this AEO role, Art was the P&L Manager for TI's High Performance Analog Division, a $2 billion plus revenue division of TI. Art led the acquisition of several companies for TI, most notably Chipcon, a low-power RF company based in Norway. He also integrated the largest portion of TI's acquisition of the Burr Brown Corporation into his high-performance analog division. He is a graduate, and I'd say a proud graduate, of Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering in 1983. In 2007, he received the university's Outstanding Alumni Engineering Achievement Merit Award at the school's 50th anniversary. He also earned a master's degree in engineering management in 1990 from SMU right here in Dallas. Art has been honored as the Black Engineer at the Black Engineer of the Year Awards conference twice as one of the 100 most important blacks in technology. He has also received the Career Achievement in Industry Award from NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. Art served as a member of the board of directors for the Nordson Corporation, Excelis Technologies Corporation, and the Circor Corporation. Art retired from all public board service in 2022, and he and his wife Gwen and their daughter Tiffany continue to live in the DFW area. Art, my friend, it is awesome to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
As am I. What's crazy is that when we talked just a couple of days ago, I was thinking over the fact that we've known each other for at least 15 years, maybe 20.
Wow.
And some of these specific things that we're going to talk about as it relates to making these leaps in careers, I don't know that we specifically have talked about these in the way we're going to talk about them today. And so, like the listeners, I am excited to get to it. Is there anything you want the listeners to know about you before we get moving?
You know, I'm just incredibly blessed, and I know that the success that I've had in my life is not really about me, and I just want to share with the listeners that is a really important part of my life and who I am and the life journey that I've been on.
Awesome. All right, so first question to kick off. You're the guest DJ the interim, if you will, for a past job or a present job, any job that you would say, man, for 1 week, I get to do that job, and it would be like a dream. What's that job for you?
Well, we talked a bit before we started, and you mentioned that someone else said commissioner of the NFL. So that person's going to have to get out of the way for me because that would truly be my dream job because I love football. My wife and I are big football fans. That takes up a lot of our social time in the fall. So that would be my number one on the list of things that I would like to do. And aside from that, the titles that I love today are father, husband, brother, cousin, friend.
Yeah.
Those are the things that really fire me up. So I want to spend more time doing those things.
Awesome. All right, so look, you've made some big old leaps in your career, serving as a director for public companies, senior vice president, the very first in the history of Texas Instruments Incorporated. I'm just curious, before we get into those specifics, was there anything about your background or inside your family structure even, or experiences or events that you had that triggered in your mind way back that you could do these kinds of things that you've done?
In my family, no. I was blessed to come from a family of two hardworking parents, but neither of which had much education. So the idea of getting a college degree was not a certainty when I was growing up, but I had a sister who sort of paved the way and was the first in our family. So I followed in her footsteps to go to Southern University. The idea of pursuing a degree in electrical engineering, no one I knew was an engineer of any kind. So
Yeah.
long story short, the answer was no. But I think the thing that really opened my eyes was when I was in college. I had some really pivotal experiences that I think opened my eyes to the possibilities.
Okay. So not necessarily growing up in the home, certainly in college is when some light bulbs
Yes.
begin to come on for
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So now you're at Southern University, and I'm curious because I don't know that I ever asked you, not only are you a student at Southern, but you had some affiliation with the band, if I'm not mistaken, as well. I want you to talk about that a little bit. And then you make the decision of all the places you could go to this company called Texas Instruments. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't start necessarily at headquarters, or did you? I don't remember.
I did not.
Yeah, so you started in Sherman,
Right.
Which
Right.
is, for those listening, it's not exactly a suburb of Dallas, certainly not at that time.
It's a long way away. It's about 50, 60 miles away from headquarters. So
Right.
you could say it certainly is. It's not like being in a remote site in another continent or country, but almost.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was that decision like for you to say, I'm going to go here to TI and TI Sherman in particular?
If I may, let me just back up to a couple of things that you mentioned, because some of the pivotal things that impacted me was my time at Southern and even in high school in marching band. So I was a trumpet player. My father was a trumpet player, actually, who played in World War II. And so I sort of followed in his footsteps as a musician. And I went to Southern with two dreams. One, to be the greatest trumpet player ever in the history of Southern University. And two, to get an electrical engineering degree, which I didn't really know much about, but sounded really good to me. It sounded interesting, sounding challenging.
Yeah.
I liked the starting salaries that I read about for electrical engineers. And I was just fascinated by all things electricity, electrical. And so those natural curiosities led me there. And I played in the marching band for 2 years. Great experiences. I had the opportunity to play halftime of Super Bowl 15.
Wow.
This is before, they did all the headliners for the halftime. So our band was the halftime show for Super Bowl 15. We did Ronald Reagan's inauguration. And then we did the Tournament of Roses parade, which is the first time I was ever on an airplane in my life, right? So for a young man from rural Louisiana who'd never been much farther than Baton Rouge or New Orleans, my time in the band really opened my eyes. And part of that was the fact that I recognized that while I was a really good trumpet player, I met some people who were truly great, gifted trumpet players.
Yeah.
And the reason why I stopped playing in the marching band after 2 years was that I realized that if I was going to have a long, successful career, probably wasn't going to be music. And I really needed to focus all my attention and effort on engineering. And I don't know how much you know about HBCU marching bands.
Oh, a little bit.
They take up a lot of time.
They do.
So,
They do.
So that redirecting that time into engineering was, I think, a really good choice.
Okay. Yeah, my mentee most recently just graduated from Langston University.
Okay.
And then I attended an HBCU, which is a little known fact, for a year and a half. So, yes, I definitely have some appreciation for our HBCUs out there. So, how about the decision to get to TI? How did that come about?
It came about as I was getting close to graduation. One of the pivotal things that happened to me in my college career was after my sophomore year, I actually got an internship working for the Xerox Corporation. And I ended up working for them for 3 summers,
wow.
summers until I graduated. Really thought I would probably go to work for Xerox.
Sure, yeah.
I was going to have seniority. I liked the company. I was amazed because I was working in their headquarters up in Rochester and Webster in the suburbs where they had a lot of facilities. And I was fascinated because they had all these brothers and sisters, black people, who were VPs and high-level people. And this was in the early 1980s. And there were no people like that in my neighborhood. So I'm like, wow, this was eye-opening. So back to when my eyes were open to the possibilities of what my career could be, that clearly was pivotal for me. So why did I end up at TI and not at Xerox?
Yeah.
Well, I love working for Xerox, and I love being in Rochester in the summertime, but I knew I would hate being in Rochester in the winters. So I begged them that, hey, I want to come to work for you, but not in Rochester, right? And so they had a facility in Palo Alto. So they offered me a job there, and they offered me a job in Rochester. But they also had a very big facility here in Dallas.
Okay.
And I said, hey, what would be ideal? Get me a job in Dallas, and I'm yours. And finally, my HR contact came back and said, hey, they're just not hiring in Dallas right now. Take the job in Palo Alto, take the job in Rochester, and then in a year or two, you can transfer. And for whatever reason, that just, didn't totally feel right to me.
Yeah, it didn't float your boat.
No. And I was interviewing like crazy. I
Okay.
mean, I was interviewing with almost any company possible because the year before I graduated, all of my friends, the market for engineers it was really not so great. So they struggled to get 1, maybe 2 full-time offers. So I'm like, I'm not going to let that happen to me. So I'm interviewing with everybody, including, Xerox. And so I was fortunate and blessed that the market turned.
Okay.
And every company I interviewed with, I actually was offered a plant visit. And every plant visit I took, I was offered a full-time job.
How about that?
So I was sitting in my bedroom in Ethel, Louisiana, with these 13, 14 offers, contemplating what was the right place for me to go.
Wow.
And so I said one evening that, God, I'm just going to pray about this tonight. And whatever is on my mind when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to trust that this is where you want me to go. And I woke up and I thought about Texas Instruments in Sherman, Texas, and that's the story.
It's crazy that in all this time we've known each other, I don't think you've ever
No,
told me that
we've
story.
never talked about this. No. Yeah, I'm learning things about you that clearly, we never talked about.
This is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is awesome. Okay. All right. So now you're inside the walls of Texas Instruments. Now, in some ways, maybe where you were from in a rural place in Louisiana might be more similar to that of Sherman, at least outside the walls. Inside the walls, at least for me, as someone who is Black, African American, in the early 1980s, this is maybe my bias, but I'm just thinking that can't be the warmest, friendliest place. Although I know lots of Shermanites and I have met some really, really good people there. But that's my thinking going in. What was your experience like going into Sherman?
It was very interesting. I think the city of Sherman itself, a small city, was better for me being a rural guy. I was not a big city guy, so I don't think that would have been the best choice for me in terms of just my overall happiness, the things I like to do outside of work. So that fit really well.
Okay.
But yeah, I wasn't the first Black engineer in the semiconductor division in Sherman, Texas. But the first one had already come and gone. And so I heard all about that person when I arrived. And
so literally you're talking about one person
yeah,
before you
yeah,
who was African American, and it was not good in terms of story.
No, they had already decided that that wasn't a good place for them to be and moved on. So I arrived and I had some interesting experiences, but having grown up in Ethel, Louisiana in the 60s, where again my early childhood memories were of going to doctor's visits, and there were still separate waiting rooms for blacks and whites. Not something I read about. That was my childhood in Louisiana in the early 60s. So the idea of prejudice and racism was not new to me. I sort of, expected that. So that didn't scare me at all. And I went there and I had some interesting experiences. People always would meet me and they go, "Oh, it's great to have you. It's good that you're here. You're a technician?" They just couldn't really imagine
Operator, you must be.
right,
Yeah, right.
that I was an engineer.
Mhm.
And I had to subtly inform them that no, I'm an engineer. And I had one experience with this one lady that I remember really well. She was a planner and I had to work with her to get material built.
Yep.
And I went over to her office all the time and she had this Confederate battle flag on her desk. And where I'm from in Louisiana, that means a few things.
It does.
Right.
Having
It
grown
means
up in
that-
Louisiana myself.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
It means that, likely you're a member of the KKK and you're probably very racist. And she seemed like a nice enough lady. And, my first reaction was, oh man, I really have to work with this person? But I eventually thought about it and I went to her one day and after I started to get to know her and I said, "Hey, why do you have that on your desk?"
Yeah.
And she said to me that something to the effect that, her family was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. They're very proud of that. And I said, "Gee, that's great, but do you know what that implies to people like myself who grew up black?" And I explained to her that, it immediately signals some things that maybe you don't want people to think about you, right? And so when I went back to her desk the next day, I never saw that again. And I was really glad that I didn't make the assumption that I would normally make and just, poison the relationship.
Right.
That I instead, tried to ask why and then educate.
There's a lesson there, which is a lot of what we do as a coach, right? Which, you do some of that stuff too, is you were curious. You could have made an assumption and could have even made an attack. You chose not to do that. Instead, you chose to be curious and ask a question. And that maturity, I think, demonstrates in some ways why you've been able to be so successful with all the leaps that you've been able to make. And speaking of those leaps, let's talk about from your vantage point, not from my vantage point, but from your vantage point, thinking about the very first professional leap you made. You're now an employee and now there's an opportunity that somehow is in front of you. What was that leap and what were you thinking, feeling?
I'd been at Texas Instruments in Sherman for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I had gone from being the most junior engineer on the team to being the most senior engineer on the team. A lot of change, reductions in force.
Yeah.
It wasn't a great time in the history of TI financially.
Yeah.
So all that turmoil going on, reorgs. And so that happens. And then my supervisor decides to take a job at another TI facility in Midland, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so now that job's open and I'm the most senior engineer on that team. And I obviously wanted that job and I made it clear that I wanted that job. And so the person above my boss decided that, okay, I'm just not going to give you the job. I want you to act in that role. And so for 6 months, I did my normal job while I was also managing my fellow engineers that had been and were my peers to that point in time. And so that for me was that first big leap when finally he said, okay, you got the job and, you can move to your new office.
What were the emotions like when he told you, you got it, you can move to the new office?
I was excited. The good news is I had acted in the job for 6 months. So by that time, I had a good feeling that I felt like I could do the job and do the job well. I think when you talk about leaps, one of the leaps that a lot of people are going to face or have faced, like myself, is that all of a sudden you're promoted to manage people who were your peers. And either that can go really well or that can go not so well. And fortunately for me, I learned a lot of lessons. I'm sure, those people had to go through me learning a lot of those lessons and how to manage that transition and manage it well. But, I think that was big. That was big on my mind. How do I transition from being amongst the group of engineers who are complaining about the supervisor to now being the supervisor and motivating these individuals and getting them to perform well and earning their trust and their respect. So So yeah, that was a big transition in my mind, and it really solidified the idea for me of, as you know, in Texas Instruments, there are two career ladders, right? You can stay very technical,
Yes.
or you can,
Regardless of the background,
regardless
whether
of the
that's
background,
engineering or whether
right?
that's finance or what
Subject
have
matter
you.
expert,
Right.
whether it's engineering, finance, operations, whatever,
Right.
or you can go up the management ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it became clear to me that if I was going to have a long, successful career, that while I enjoyed doing the engineering, I enjoyed managing engineers much better. And I felt like my talents that God had given me, that was really a much better fit, was, the people aspect of the business.
So it seems then fairly early on, I'm even looking at your degree from SMU in 1990. I mean, it's not too long after you started, you realized that the track that you wanted was the management track.
Yes.
Still technical, but managing those who are doing the technical work.
Managing technical people, yes. Yeah, very early on, at that 2-year point, I was like, as far as this will take me, then I'm good.
Yeah, so maybe that's one of the things for the listener to consider is, you're at this crossroads, you could say, right? All of us come in with some amount of technical expertise and whatever we get our degrees in,
right?
Whatever we've studied, and now we put that to practice in the job. And maybe there's a rubber meets the road when we have to make a decision. Do I want to continue down this path of being technical, or do I want to lead and manage people who might be doing technical work? And you make that decision early. There are 2 or 3 leaps that I for sure want to make sure we cover, and we can go back if you want to hit some others. There's definitely one, the one that I remember observing you. In fact, I don't even know if you knew who I was back then. I certainly knew who you were and a number of other leaders at that time. You were managing the high performance linear business, if I'm not mistaken.
HBL.
That's right.
Oh yeah.
See that smile come to your face.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah, this was a big business, and at the time I was a financial analyst at the division level. So I got to consolidate all the numbers, do all the analysis, the pro forma analysis and financial statement analysis, right, for everything that was happening with these businesses. So I got to observe the business leaders in those big forecast reviews and other reviews. And I got to sit at the top and hear how they thought about the way that you all were performing. Well, what was clear is that High Performance Linear, the business you were managing, was one of those rocket businesses. It had tons of growth opportunity. It was complex, had a global footprint. You'd been promoted to vice president at this point, and every time I saw you, you were busy. You were moving from one place to the other. Take us back before you got the call. What were you doing? What job were you in at the time? And did you have to go interview for this? Did somebody tap you? Take us back to that part of pre-getting this vice president job.
Yeah, I think we need to go back to my Sherman career.
Okay.
I'd been in Sherman from 1984 to 1997 when I actually moved.
I didn't realize that.
To take a job in the analog organization when they were reorging to make catalog, analog, a big focus for the future of the company.
Yeah.
And so I'd been doing the job. I'd been promoted again in Sherman. My vision was that, perhaps I would, finish my career. I like what I was doing. I like the people I was doing with. Maybe I'd get to be a department manager or something like that.
Yeah.
I'd worked for 30, 40 years and then ride off into the sunset and, call it a great career. So that was the vision that I had at the time. But in the 90s, I was blessed to meet someone who became a great mentor for me, a gentleman by the name of James Mitchell, who's now passed on.
Yes.
But he was the first Black vice president in the history of TI.
Yes.
And he also had an engineering background, engineer from Prairie View.
Yes.
I'm engineer from Southern. And we bonded over the idea that we were both passionate to see an increase in the number of underrepresented minorities in engineering at TI and women in TI. So he basically sort of recruited me to do a lot of campus visits to recruit at schools where we didn't have a presence. We didn't have a lot of engineers from those schools. So I went to Tuskegee. I went to Tennessee State. I went to Prairie View.
Okay.
Of course, I went to Southern. So I did a lot of work in that area, not as my day job, but because we were both passionate about these things. And then, about that time in my career in TI, I had been doing it. I was well respected for what I was doing. I felt like I was doing well, but I'd reached a point where I was not really that challenged anymore, right? Once you've done product development on, I don't know, 600 or 700 ICs, they kind of all start to be about the same,
I
right?
know that. I know that feeling. Yes.
So James actually had a job open as a full-time recruiter. And
Oh, okay.
I actually went to him and I said, hey, James, you know what? I think I might want that job. And he said, well, hey, let's meet. We'll have lunch. We'll talk about it. And he was down at headquarters. I was in Sherman, 60 miles away. We met in the middle in McKinney and had this lunch to talk about, me wanting this job. And he came to that lunch and he said to me something I did not expect. Turned out to be a really pivotal thing for me, back to the leap question.
Yeah.
That brought me to headquarters and brought me to analog, which really was a pivotal move for me to get where I eventually
see that
was
now.
blessed to go.
Now I understand. Yeah.
And so he said, Art, if you want the job, it's yours. You can have it. But I'm going to advise you not to take it. And I was a bit taken aback by that. That's not what I expected. And I said, James, what do you mean? And he said to me, before I came here, I went and did some homework. And you're the only black engineer in all of TI that I can find that looks like you've got the right background and you're on track to one day run a big P&L for TI. And if you move out of engineering and move into HR like I did, you'll probably never get back. And I would hate for you to miss out on the opportunity to further your career. So I was a bit flummoxed. But I said to him, hey, James, I hear what you're saying. I respect your advice. Let me do this. Let me go home. Let me think about it. Let me talk to my wife about it. I'll pray about it, and I'll give you an answer. So the next day I called him up, and I said, hey, James, I'm not sure why, but I'm going to take your advice, and I'm not going to take the job. Little did I know, he left that meeting. And by the way, he never told me this. Someone else, another TI leader, another senior vice president, many years later told me the rest of the story. He left that lunch and went back to headquarters, and he obviously, being a VP, had a relationship with the then CEO, Tom Ingemus, and the COO, Rich Templin, and he went that very day and said, hey, there's this guy named Art George up in Sherman. I hear he's pretty good, but he's getting impatient, and if we don't do something for him, he's probably going to get impatient and leave.
Yeah.
And it was just a few months later, I got the phone call to interview for a job in Dallas in the analog business that they were reorging to put more focus on catalog analog. So long story, but that obviously was a huge leap. Wouldn't have happened, one, if I had not pursued other opportunities, let people know that I was interested in doing something else. Turned out that wasn't what I ended up doing. But because I let James know I was interested, he took it upon himself to be what we should all be great advocates for other people, right? And he made a huge difference for me.
Yeah.
He really did.
Yeah. James, you and I both know him, and you know him really well. And he and I got a chance to know each other before he died, and just a great, solid rock of a man.
Yeah.
And I knew some pieces of that, but I didn't know exactly how that all came together. So I appreciate you sharing that. So now you're at this point where you're in Dallas, so you're out of Sherman, and they ask you, I'm assuming, you tell me how the HPL opportunity specifically came about, because that was not just any business. That was a pretty big business with some opportunity.
Yeah, my first role was for a much smaller P&L. It was called PA&I.
Okay, precision
analog amplifiers and interface.
Yeah.
And so when I took the job in Dallas, I left a team of 50 people in Sherman and Malaysia that I was managing to take a team of less than 20 people in analog, which in many ways might have looked like a step backwards. But I was ready for a challenge. I wanted to prove to, if no one else other than myself, that what I thought of as my major strengths and talents as a leader, if it would travel. I grew up in Sherman. Those people knew me. If I went somewhere where no one had ever heard of Art George before, could I do it again? Could I establish myself as a leader and prove to myself, if no one else, that really is what God had gifted me to do? And so I love the idea of the challenge. And so it was a small business. It was probably doing less than $200 million a year. when I got the piece that came in the reorg for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then out of that grew the opportunity through the acquisition of Burr Brown to create high performance linear. Right. So it was a combination of my smaller business PAI and the piece of Burr Brown that I inherited that formed the basis for HPL when you first got to know me or know who I was.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. You know, the world of reorgs and how things come together. Hey listeners, if you're busy, and I know you are, but you want to grow your leadership in an efficient and cost-effective way, I invite you to check out my on-demand digital leadership courses at bonafideleaders.com/courses. Now, you're wondering, what do I get in exchange for my purchase? Well, you'll get dynamic teaching and insights, and you'll leave with the tools and practical application you need to be a more effective and impactful leader, wherever you lead, at work or at home. You'll become more confident in your capabilities because you'll know your unique leadership style and how to apply it. You will know how to create powerful and engaging meetings and also how to better integrate your work and life. You'll get that and much, much more. Now, if that weren't enough, with your purchase, as my gift to you, you'll also be added to the Digital Bonafide Leaders community, a real community of leaders like you for networking, best practice sharing, and you'll have direct access to me. Go to the website and you'll find a link in the show notes, and you'll get instant access today. So there's a couple things I'll highlight. One is that you were ready for a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You had gone maybe about as far as you could go with what you had seen up to this point in Sherman.
Right.
You thought you wanted something,
mm-hmm.
be a recruiter.
Right.
Turns out that's not what those in a position of influence thought. And you gave it your own thought and you decided to, okay, I won't do that. And then lo and behold, opportunities come for you to interview for something that at the time is smaller.
Much smaller.
than what you had before.
Right.
And then that balloons to something much bigger because there was a reorganization.
Right.
And so you're hitting on something, Art, that I think is just so important for all of us to understand, which is that the career is not linear.
No. It's not, step 1, 2, 3, and 4. Careers go in different directions. Sometimes it may look like you take a step back or take a step laterally. But it's all about continuing to move in the general right direction of where you believe your best talents are and where the best opportunities are. At the time, analog was not the sexy place to be.
That's exactly right.
Right.
It is now.
I left the business that was making most of the profit for TI, right? The digital logic business was basically keeping TI alive from a semiconductor standpoint, right? And, I went to a business that was smaller, but with the promise that they were going to invest, they were going to acquire, they were going to do whatever was necessary to go from being sort of a number 3 or 4 player in the catalog analog integrated circuit market to one day be number 1. And the idea of, okay, if you're in, I'm all in, let's go do this, right?
There's a few more things there. One is that you just indicated you had some faith and belief because there was a promise. It wasn't something that was signed and delivered.
Nope.
These acquisitions hadn't all occurred yet.
Oh no. None of it.
So this is literally the definition of taking a leap of faith. Believing that what they're telling you is going to come out and happen, but not knowing for sure. And at the same time, you're taking something smaller and hopeful that it will blossom into something bigger.
Right.
So, it's just a reminder for all of us that, when we look at our careers and opportunities, they're not all created equally.
No.
And how they look today may not be what they will be in the future.
As I reflect on it, Tim, I'm sure I would have had a good career had I not made the leap to join Catalog Analog. I could have stayed in Sherman for 30, 40 years and finished up my career and felt good about it. But there's no way in my mind that I would have gotten as far, and certainly in TI in terms of becoming a senior member of the leadership team and being a senior vice president and running a $1 billion plus business.
Yeah.
I just can't see how any of that would have happened.
So I want to talk some about the softer side of this thing, right? The feelings and the emotions. Again, you being kind of a trailblazer when you really think about it. It wasn't like there were a number of people who looked like you who you could go and copy, maybe at Xerox, but not in the place that you were working.
Right.
And so what are your feelings and emotions during this time as you're getting more opportunity to manage more, lead more, be responsible for more things? What's happening on the inside for you during this period of time?
A couple of things come to mind. Another really important thing that happened for me, and this was while I was still at Sherman,
Mm-hmm.
they had a leadership development program that I went through at TI. By the way, this has changed since, you and I were there. Leadership development inside of TI was not really a thing. So, but they did have this program where they brought in coaches and psychologists, and they put us through Myers-Briggs testing and put us through role play, and you got this giant book all about you, 360 feedback from everybody,
Okay.
what you're good at, what you're not so good at, what you need to work on, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it just further reinforced to me that my best talents were really all about, my ability to connect with people, to motivate people, to lead people, to inspire and encourage people. And so coming out of that and doing the Myers-Briggs, I learned something very interesting about myself as a leader at TI.
What was that?
Before the current leaders at TI would let any of the people like myself go through it, they went through it themselves. So they had all done the Myers-Briggs Personality Index, if you are familiar with that. And so the people running the program said, oh, by the way, would you like to see, of the 16 boxes, your current leadership, where do they all fall, which boxes they fall in, right? And so here I am down in the corner as an ENTJ. All of the TI leaders, VPs, CEOs, COOs were in the farthest corner away, right, with an I something,
That's right.
And so I looked at that and I said, well, I'm just not of the right personality type to get to that level. So I never even worried about that. I didn't even think about that, right? I'm just looking for jobs where I can be challenged, I can do good work, I can make a difference, I can work with people I enjoy working with, and we can accomplish great things. So the idea of becoming a VP or senior VP, I totally dismissed that after seeing that data. So that gave me the freedom to be the best ENTJ that I could be. And so I left that with the way I do it won't look like these other leaders. My strengths are different than these other leaders. And I am willing to be the best ENTJ can be in this company. And so therefore, I was very comfortable being a leader who was different than almost every one of my peers that I work with and people I work for. So
yes. All right, ENTJ, for those who are listening, if I remember correctly, the E is for extrovert, the N is for intuitive, T for thinking, and J for judging, right? When we're talking about the Myers-Briggs. I got a similar story I could share on that one, but we'll run out of time. All right, so there's another big leap coming. Let's talk a little bit about the high-performance linear job, meaning at that point, you had a business that probably had 250, 300 people or so inside the business unit. Global footprint. Obviously, a lot of products being developed out of Tucson, being developed out of Dallas and other parts. And it's a complex business, too. And I remember it being lots of crazy manufacturing flows, and the product engineers and test engineers had to do a lot of crazy work in order to make those products go.
Right.
At the same time, it was a high value, meaning our customers really valued the product offering that we had. And it was a truly, purely catalog kind of a business. That's what I remember about it. Right?
Many customers, high margins, because the people value the products, right?
Yes. So you're leading that. That's a single business unit. At some point, now you're asked to go manage not a single business unit, but a division which has multiple businesses like HPL inside of it. What was that experience like? I've never asked you that. What was that like?
I loved it. You mentioned something.
But you got to back up, Art. Before you took it.
All right.
What was the conversation? What was involved in that? Was it a knock on the door? Did you have to, give time? Did you make a decision right away? I'm always curious the backstory, how that came together.
It was an opportunity that I wanted. It was an opportunity that I told people I wanted. That one of the things I would also share with people is that you got to let people know what it is you dream about doing, right? What you want to do next or beyond next, right? And so just to back up a little bit, I was running the HPL business, and ultimately another pivotal person in my career, Greg Lowe, was brought in to be over the catalog analog business. We had kept the CEO of Burr Brown, Cyrus McGarvey. He became my boss. Quite honestly, the toughest part of my TI career. We won't spend time on that here, but it was really tough. And so when Greg Lowe came in and became my boss after Cyrus, he was a breath of fresh air for me, and we seemed to work well together. And if I go back to my early career, the gentleman who made me wait for 6 months before giving me the promotion in Sherman, he got promoted again, and he promoted me, right? So I formed a really strong, positive working relationship with someone who had the ability to make another move or two, something else that I think is important. And same thing happened with Greg Lowe. He clearly was brought in with the idea that he had more runway to go higher. We formed a really good working relationship. And when, he got promoted, he had to make a choice amongst the people reporting to him of who he was going to promote or bring someone in from the outside. And it really was, hey, Art, I'm getting this promotion, and I've decided that if you want the job, it's yours. So it was as simple as that. And, I'd already said I wanted the job. I told him I wanted the job. I told him I'd be mad if I didn't get the job if he ever got promoted. So, yeah, it wasn't a long conversation, though.
That's incredible.
No.
One thing I get from you, Art, is that you speak your mind. You make it clear what you want.
Yeah.
And
ask for what you want.
Yeah, ask what you want. And, the person has a choice. They can tell you, yeah, sure, or no.
Yeah, the worst thing is that they can say no. But, what if they say yes, right? Or what if they say maybe, and what if they say, let me think about it. And you have a chance to maybe then convince them to get to yes. So it's a personal philosophy. And in life, I think there are two things you can do to have a great life. I have lots of lists that I use in my coaching, teaching business. Yes. One of which is, the two things you need to do to have a great life is ask for what you want versus accepting what people are willing to give you in every aspect of your life.
Say that again. That's powerful. And I've heard you say it, but just so the listener can catch that.
Ask for what you want versus accepting what people are willing to give you in every aspect of your life, personal, professional. I think it is a thing to live by. And it's a thing that I coach and a thing that obviously I practice what I preach, right? Yes. That the worst thing that can happen is they say no. And what if you ask and they say yes? And what if even they don't say yes all the time, but you get a yes 50% of the time? How much better is your life for always asking for exactly what it is you want? And I found in my coaching life, most people don't do that or don't naturally come to that.
Right. Which is where you come in, to help give people the skills and the confidence to be able to do just that. All right, so let's talk about scale for a second. I mean, it's one thing to manage a single business unit. It's a whole nother thing to manage a division with multiple business units. And I've got to believe HPA back then probably had somewhere between 5 and 7 business units. Can you help our listeners understand your approach at that time to scaling into that kind of a size, division, and responsibility?
Well, first of all, I love complexity. I love the idea of complex processes, systems, because I found it interesting and challenging, so fulfilling for me in terms of the work. And so I also felt like that my approach to running my business unit was a scalable approach if you move to the next level, right, to run a division, right? And so basically now I'm just teaching people to do what I just did, right? So from that standpoint, I was fortunate to, in the roles that I get, learn techniques for leadership and management that scaled, right? That I saw many leaders along the way in my TI career, I'm sure you saw some, that led in a way that wouldn't scale, right? To 100 people, 1,000 people, the whole company, right? But the experiences that I gained running smaller businesses and running smaller teams, now it's just replicating those across different entities, and the fact that there are different products and different markets and different customers was just fascinating to me to learn and a challenge, and I loved it, and it made every day interesting. Always, every day there's some problem.
Always.
But that's what we get paid for, right?
That's right.
We get paid to solve problems.
All right, let's get tactical for a second. Someone's going through a scaling right now that's listening. They are trying to figure out, how in the world can I go from leading 3 people to leading 6 people? How can I go from running a $100 million business to running a $200 million business? Based on what you've done, what are some tactical things, activities that you would recommend to that listener who's trying to scale? What can they do?
Well, one of the things I would encourage them to think about first is that in order to scale, you need to build a great team. And early on, from those early days of managing my peers and figuring out how not to damage them in their careers, the ability to be able to scale the ideas, the concepts that you have as a leader across multiple things, right? And so I was very fortunate that I had experiences that allowed me to have complex things. And so the idea of what worked well for those complex things now could be applied to other complex things. But the most important ingredient
Mm-hmm.
is the people.
Yeah.
It's the team,
Yeah.
the team you put around you, right? If you want to scale from, $100 million business to $1 billion business, right? You need a team of people below you that are great at running $100 million businesses, right? Or that you can coach and train and develop to be great at running $100 million businesses. So your ability to assess talent,
Mm-hmm.
to then recruit that talent, to convince them that they're better on your team than on somebody else's team, and then to
Yeah.
keep them long enough for them to hopefully go on and do great things and get promoted beyond that. That's the mindset you really need to have. It's all about building a great team
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be able to scale.
Okay, love it. I want to shift to a completely different section. I want to talk personal for just a second. There was a period in your life where you went through a challenging situation, went through a divorce. I'm curious, at what point in your career was that? And how are you working through that just on the personal side? And then how did that affect your mindset in terms of day-to-day job and work?
Yeah, that was very challenging. And I've had the opportunity to mentor and coach other people who have since gone through the same kind of thing that I went through, and it's never easy.
Mm-hmm.
So where was I in my career? I was actually the HPA manager, so I was at the
Wow.
height of my career
Yeah.
when I made a really tough personal decision that I had been in an unhappy marriage for about 2 decades, and I had stayed in that marriage largely because of my daughter, Tiffany, who I love dearly.
Yes.
And I felt I needed to be there for her
Mm-hmm.
through her formative years until she got through high school. And then I made the decision that it was really time for me to make a change in my personal life. I wasn't getting support. When I went home, I was surrounded by all these talented, happy people who seemed to love me and love being around me. But when I went home to someone who didn't feel that way, or certainly didn't express it in that way. And so it was a really difficult decision to make. And given where I was career-wise, probably the worst time
Yeah.
to make it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it felt like that it was, all things considered, the best thing to do. And so I made that decision. I filed for divorce. I was coming to work during the day and being Art George, the HPA manager, and trying my very best not to let what was going on in that part of my life detract from my ability to do my job and to be the leader that my team and my people needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd leave work and go deal with the personal side of that. But I will tell you, Tim, that ultimately I did have to let people know. And if you ever go through one of these kinds of situations in your life, deciding when to tell people, your boss, the people you work with, I was born into a mentality that if you don't have something good to say, don't say anything at all. So when I finally started telling people that I was going through a divorce, they were shocked because, I'd never said anything that let people know that things were really not so good at home.
Mm-hmm.
But after they got over the shock of it, the amount of support
Yeah.
and love and understanding I got from everyone was just unbelievable, right? And that's what I'll forever love about Texas Instruments: the people, the culture, the kind of people who come and stay there for a long time are just great people. And so that made it easier. Didn't make it easy. There were some tough days, and I'd go from trying to decide what's the right thing to do for part of my business, right, that was make or break in terms of our success in the market, to dealing with my lawyer and going through bunches of other things that I had to do to get through that process, which took the better part of a year and a half. So, I mean, it wasn't a day or two and it was over. It took quite a while to get to the other side.
Yeah. I just appreciate your vulnerability in sharing something that's not easy to go through, maybe even more difficult, particularly to talk about, right? For those who are in senior level positions. And you know how that is. So many people look up to you, and so many people talk and say things. And of course, as leaders, I don't want to say we wear a mask, but we sort of protect, if you will, some part of ourselves so that it's not all fully exposed, that this wall comes crumbling down.
Right, exactly. right. You don't need to see this. Right?
Right. For the listener who may be facing their own crisis, something similar or different, but it's something outside the walls of their job. But man, they got this leadership responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
What's your input to them on how do they manage through that in a way that's healthy, difficult? What's your input?
The one thing I would tell you is that for me, without my personal faith, there would be no way I could have gotten through that and the many other challenges that I faced, throughout my life and career. And so going back to that my father was a Baptist minister. I grew up in the church. I was a preacher's kid in all the worst kinds of ways. But in the best kinds of ways, I was schooled in the Bible and personal faith from an early age. And in those crises, when I needed to go back and lean on it, that was there. So that was a big part of it. And my church family, and so that was a network that I could lean on.
Yeah.
And then obviously when I let my work family know, that also became a network that I can lean on. And what I tell you is that there are people out there who do care about you, will care about you, are there to help. Again, not everybody, but if you're thoughtful about the people that you surround yourself with, it does make a huge difference in getting through these really difficult things. And so having someone that you can talk to, that you know that what you say isn't going to go anywhere.
Yes.
And I've always tried to be that for a lot of people, that I encounter in my life, because I think we all need that.
Yeah.
So that is what helped me. I had a few people that I could really be vulnerable with and trust, and who, on those really dark days when my faith was not as strong as I needed to be, they would prop me up.
Yeah. All right, switching gears then to maybe this last area we'll talk about, this last phase of what I'll call the big moves.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, you start thinking about the idea of maybe public for-profit board service.
Yes. Yes.
Can you talk some about the motivation, where that came about?
Yes. As a senior leader at TI and running a business, I got to interact with the Texas Instruments board quite a bit. And so I got to present to the board. And one of the things I did enjoy about TI at that time, they did really encourage the senior leaders to really get to know the board members, and they'd have dinners and functions and events. And so having that exposure of being in the boardroom allowed me to then become curious about the idea of, while it's okay being in the boardroom and answering the questions, but it seems like it'd be so much more fun asking the questions, right? So early on in my time working with the TI board, that seed was planted in my mind that when I think about what's next for me beyond my time here at TI, by the way, no one should stay forever, right? Right? We should all be thinking about what's next for us beyond whatever it is that we're doing today, and grooming someone to replace us at the same time. I was thinking, wow, it would be a great transition to be able to take all the stuff I've learned in 30-ish years about the corporate world and being a senior executive and being a leader and running businesses and operations and engineering and all this knowledge. I just don't want to ride off into the sunset and just set this knowledge on a shelf and that it doesn't help in some other way. And so it became clear to me that one way I could use that knowledge would be to become a member of a public company board and paying board. So let's not be confused, right? I've been on many nonprofit boards, and I continue to serve on a number, and I think that's important. Sure. If you aspire to be on a paying board, I think that's almost a prerequisite. Find some nonprofit boards and get to work and prove you can make a difference there. That will help you earn your resume for that first real paying job, by the way. But I started telling everybody that I would interact with that when they'd ask me about me and my career and what I was thinking, hey, I want to do this public company board thing, right? And at the time, I was running HBA. We had thousands of customers. It seemed to be a job prerequisite to visit every one of them, although I didn't get to all of them.
No,
I got
a little
to a
bit
lot
hard.
of them.
That's a little bit difficult.
It's a little difficult, but as I was going to all these customers and planting these seeds, people asked me, what do you want to do? Whenever my time's up, I'd love to do this public company board thing. And so one of the individuals that I shared that with, his name was Joe Keithley. He at the time was the CEO of this company that was a customer of TI's, Keithley Instruments.
Yes. Test and measurement, was it? Or
yeah, test and measurement, which is
remember.
my technical background,
That's
right?
right.
So he and I immediately, were kind of simpatico. I was a test engineer, my first real engineering job at TI.
Right.
And so we just developed a great leader, also a person of faith. So we connected at that level. And so I would share with him, hey, this is what I'm thinking about, this is what I'm dreaming about. And then time went on. I moved out of the HPA job into the analog engineering operations role that you talked about in my bio.
Yep.
And so I lost track of Joe, and he had sold his company.
Okay.
So he was no longer doing that. So, one day I get this phone call from this headhunter who was looking for a board member for this company called the Nordson Corporation. Interestingly enough, not one of the thousands of customers that I knew already and companies that I had visited. I didn't know anything about Nordson. And this person was saying, hey, we have a couple of openings on the board and we're starting to interview people and your name has come up. And I'm like, wow, this is great, but I'm this HPA manager and I can't control my schedule.
Correct.
Here's the reality of, being a senior vice president at TI and companies like it.
That's right.
Your schedule is not your own,
That's
right?
right.
Other people decide where you're going to be and what you're going to be doing. And a lot of times it changes on a moment's notice.
Yes.
So if you're going to be on a public company board, they set their calendars years in advance, and they really depend on you being able to be there. So I'm on this phone call thinking, man, this would be great, but I'm just not sure I can make that work. And thankfully, the person said, and oh, by the way that we got your name, the person who told us to look into you, his name is Joe Keithley. And I'm like, wow, I can't not, interview for this, right? It's Joe, right? Joe, who was a great friend. And so I did not at all want to come across that I wasn't thankful that he put my name in for this, right? So long story short, I went from listening politely and thinking I'm not sure I can make this work to doing my homework and researching Nordson and thinking, oh no, if I'm ever going to get a first board, this is a dream board to get because I like the company. It's a different industry. I don't know. Again, I can learn something new challenge, prove myself yet again in a new world. And oh, by the way, Joe Keithley was the chairman of the board of Nordson. So he had not forgotten, right? And he had gone on to, sort of himself navigate towards doing public company board service was kind of really what he was doing at that stage of his career. And he had not forgotten that. I told him that that's what I dreamed about.
How about that?
How about that?
It's terrific. I mean, that's the power of relationships.
It is.
And you really never know where relationships will go and how doors will open. I can say here personally, a big thanks to you for the many doors, whether I know all of them or not, that you've at least been a supporter of helping me open over the years. And so, again, the Joe relationship proved to open a door for you to be able to serve on a public board.
It did.
You ended up serving on 3 boards and have since retired from board service. Any lessons for the listeners on making that leap from being an operator to now being more like oversight? It's a little different.
No. It's a lot different. Right? Yeah.
Okay,
So it is a leap. So I think it's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Because you really do have to change your mindset and approach from being an operating executive where, again, okay, great, let me make a decision. Show me the data and we'll make a decision and we'll go make something happen. That's not your job anymore, right? There are other people that is their job, and your job is oversight, is, to a degree, advising, counseling, challenging, but not deciding, right? And not being able to turn off that immediate desire that people have for decades come into your office and said, hey, we got this challenge, we got this problem, you just want to fix it, right? Can't do that in the board, right? You have to be able to turn that down and then be able to be thoughtful about sharing advice, feedback, even challenging the operating executives to a certain extent. Again, they don't work for you, they work for the CEO and for the other senior leaders. So it is developing a new muscle memory and a new technique that you don't get to use so much as as an operating executive. And so, again, I view it as a learning experience, so I definitely had to go back to school. I feel like I'm a very good operating executive. I want to be a very good, to great board member. And what are the things that great board members do? And they are thoughtful about being able to make a difference in the boardroom. And that's what I loved about it. I loved being in the room and feeling like that because I was in the room, because my opinion was in the room, that a different decision got made, that a different thing got discussed, that a
Yes.
different option was considered.
Yeah.
Right? That was extremely satisfying. And so that's the way you have to show value in that world versus you're just in charge, you make all decisions and you live with the results, right? And you have to own them.
The art, no pun intended, of leadership right there. I just really appreciate you coming in today. I appreciate all the wisdom that you've given to me personally and that which you are sharing with the listening audience today. For those who are navigating their own leaps, any parting thoughts for those folks who are listening?
Well, I'd definitely like to say that as much as you are an admirer of me, I am equally an admirer of you. I think I've told you before that when you first came on my radar screen, and I'm like, who is that guy, right? I had some people that had roles that you eventually had before that were members of my team who I thought the world of, and you were quite simply better. And then I became a Tim fan and a Tim cheerleader and a Tim advocate whenever I could be. What I'd say to people is that, it is great to be talented. It's great to be talented and also surround yourself with other talented people that you can get advice from and you can get counsel from. And so I think the thing that you got to do is to build your own network of people around you that you admire, you respect, you look up to them, and that they do things in a way that you go, yeah. I might not do it exactly like them, but yeah, that's the kind of excellence I aspire to, and I can maybe learn some things from them. And so what I tell your listeners is that Tim Williams is a great coach, a great leader, a great operating executive, and you can learn some things from Tim Williams. So if I were you, my best advice would be to get some time with someone like Tim and listen to some of that advice.
I appreciate you saying that. Appreciate your words of encouragement. And this has been so fun for me.
It's been a blast, right?
Go down this journey of things that, we've talked about so many things and yet haven't had this specific conversation. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. If you got value from this podcast, don't keep it a secret. Subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone you know. Until next time, remember, our world is starving for bona fide leaders. Take your leadership to the next level by applying at least one thing you heard today.